Hey everybody, it's Rod with Weichert Realtors, Equity Northwest Properties in Vancouver, Washington. I want to talk today about median home prices and how there are wide differences in neighborhoods in our own community between the median home price in one zip code or another zip code or another city and another city, and also broadly across the greater United States when you look at expensive states like all of the states on the West Coast and some of our interior states and southern states where home prices are much lower. There's a lot of mythology. There's a lot of misunderstanding about housing, and if I sell my house here and I buy a house over there, and what's the difference in price going to be? The median price isn't really going to tell the story. In fact, it may deceive you. And I want to talk a little bit about that right now. So what is median? So median is middle. That's kind of what it means. And the way they come up with it is you take all the homes that sold in a particular time period in a particular area. It could be an entire state. It could be a small community. And what you do is you add them up and you take the cheapest one at one end of the scale and the most expensive one at the other end of the scale, and then you go right to the middle. And the one in the middle is the median. I mean, literally, it's that simple. It's silly how simple it is. But it's effective, and it doesn't allow, so you could have a community, let's say, a blue-collar community. Well, I'm going to take a community right here in Vancouver, Fourth Plain Village. Fourth Plain Village was built in 1942-43 to house the 39,000 workers at Kaiser Shipyards. They built all these small little cottages that were about 750 square feet, little 2-bedroom, 1-bath houses, and they built thousands of them. And they built them in various neighborhoods in Vancouver, but Fourth Plain Village is one where almost the entire neighborhood is filled with these houses. And so these houses are small, they're much smaller than average, and so they have a lower price. Well, let's say one guy decides to build a house that's really big in Fourth Plain Village. So he knocks down his Kaiser cottage and he puts up a modern house with 2,800 square feet, and he puts in Brazilian hardwoods and slab surfaces and a tile roof, and he just goes nuts. Now, I would not recommend building an excessively expensive house filled in a community with less expensive homes, but let's say this happens. And let's say that person sells that house. Well, all of a sudden, the median price for the area is going to change, but how much will it change? Not as much as you think. Let's say 10 houses sold in a month in Fourth Plain Village, and they were all $300,000 thereabouts, right? So you take the 10 houses, you look at the fifth house on the list, and that's going to be the median. And let's say it's 301, and you go, oh, okay, the median's 301. So the next month, that guy sells his house, his big giant house, and he gets $1 million for the house. All of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, if we had an average going here, that house would literally skew the average. The average would go from 300,000 to 375 in that 1 month because of that one house that skewed the sale of the 10 houses that month in that neighborhood. Okay, where if we're using median, that house is just the most expensive house. So now we have 10 houses. The middle house is still going to be 300,000 if all the other houses were right around 300. So it really didn't change the median. That one big whale house didn't change the median, and it may not have even moved the needle at all. And so that's the reason why we use median. It doesn't bounce around as aggressively if there's a trend in more expensive houses or larger houses. It's got to be a significant trend to move it. Whereas on an average, a single house or a small group of houses that are disproportionately expensive, or the other way, disproportionately cheap, can skew an average easier than it can skew a median. And that's why we use median. And that's what median is. It's just half costs more, half costs less. So that's kind of how median prices work in general. Now, there are areas of the country, say California, which is a very expensive housing market, and say Mississippi, which is a very reasonably priced housing market. Why is California so much more expensive? It does come down to a number of factors: supply and demand, basic economic supply. How many people want to live in California versus how many people want to live in Mississippi? In general, you might say California is a state people go to. Mississippi is a place, in general, people leave. Okay? I'm not saying that to be mean to Mississippi. I've been to Mississippi. There are some beautiful parts of Mississippi, particularly along the Gulf Coast. So this is not intended to be a dig on Mississippi, but it is one of the cheapest housing markets in America, so I'm going to use it as an example. Some people might say, but Rod, what about all the people leaving California? And there's an exodus out of California. I think in the end, there's going to be a price to pay on California real estate prices. Their prices have not gone up as rapidly as prices in other parts of the country. And part of that might be because there is a bit of an exodus. But there are new people moving into California, replacing the people moving out. So there's going to be some demographic shifts in California, economic shifts in California that I think are going to see their market kind of slow and contract a little bit. And we've seen that in California before, and I think we're going to see that again. But for now, it's a very expensive state to live. Mississippi is a relative value. They are seeing some robust housing cost increases in the southern United States in general. So good news for homeowners in the South. There's more than just supply and demand, okay? There's also economics. So in California, you can get a job that pays more money. If you're a janitor at a Silicon Valley company in California, you might be making 45, 50 grand a year. If you're a janitor in Mississippi, you're probably making the national minimum wage of $8 an hour. So there's a big difference between $8 an hour and, say, $25 an hour. And so that partly would attract people. It would also create an artificial environment where housing and rent can be more expensive. And, the market's going to get what the market will bear. So there's some of that going on in California. But most importantly, and this is the thing that a lot of people don't understand about real estate, the primary driver in the cost of real estate is the cost of land. Building a house in California versus building a house in Mississippi, there are certain things that aren't going to be any different. The cost of lumber, the cost of materials, the roofing materials, the concrete, all of that is actually pretty flat across the whole United States. The difference, labor costs are higher in California than they are in Mississippi, so that gives a slight edge to Mississippi. But mostly, land and development costs. I've worked with a lot of builders, I've represented builders, sold their homes. I'm pretty familiar with land development costs, and there's a vast difference in the cost of actual land in a place like Vancouver, Washington, here, Clark County, or even in California, versus a place like Mississippi. So for example, it's not just, you see a builder pays $1 million for a large piece of land of 50 acres or whatever it is, and you think, and you do the math in your head, right? These are 10,000 square foot lots, $25,000 for each lot. That's not how it works. So there's a cost to subdivide the land, and that's a big process in any state. In some states that are regulated more like California and Washington, those costs are higher than in a state like Mississippi, which is noted for having less regulation. But there is still cost in either state to divide that up, to record those legal lots. But wait, there's more than that. The development costs can get pretty severe. The developer has to put the infrastructure in to support the 50 lots that they just divided this into. Streets, sidewalks, sewer, all of that has to be put in. And most places, the developer bears that cost. By the time everything gets sorted out, you've gone through your environmental review, you've deeded back the streets and sidewalks to the community, all of it's done, you're now ready to start hammering nails. The cost of those lots in California are probably $200,000 a piece for regular 7,000 or 8,000 square foot lots. In Mississippi, they might only be $40,000. 5 times more money in California because the raw land was more money, the bureaucratic development costs were more money, everything was more money. So you haven't even hammered a single nail, and the California house is already at 200 grand. The Mississippi house is starting at 40. So now it's about what kind of house we're going to put on this land. Let's say you want to put modest homes on there. You're trying to build houses that regular people can afford. So you're going to put a little 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with 1,000 square feet. So little tiny house because you're trying to make an affordable product. Well, in Mississippi, maybe you can build that house for $100 a foot, brand new, ready to go. So that's $100,000. And you've already got 40 in the lot. So you build it. Now the builder's got 140 invested in this product. Now the builder's going to make a 10% profit. They have to. They got to advertise a house. They got to pay people. And come on, they got to make a profit. It's usually about 10%. So that house is $154,000 in Mississippi. Wow, that's pretty cheap. But in California, we started at 200. Development costs are more expensive in California because they've got a bigger bureaucracy. It's more expensive to pay the labor. The framers are making more money. The electricians are making more money. Everybody's making more money. So maybe that house costs $120 a square foot to build in California. So a 1,000 square foot house, we get $120,000 on top of the $200,000 that we have for the lot. We're at $320,000. Builder's going to make a profit, 10%. That's about what builders make, give or take. And so that $320,000 house is roughly $360. $350. Let's call it $350. $150 in Mississippi, $350 in California. And it's that land and development costs that are the primary difference, okay? So you might say, Rod, where can you get a $350,000 house in California, brand new, 1,000 square foot? Oh, there's a lot of places in California. If you get out of the Bay Area and you get out of the LA metro, that's about what you can pay. You go to Sacramento, you'll see houses in the mid threes to low fours, brand new, small ones, okay, on little tiny lots. So that's about right. But those same houses in Mississippi would be 140, 150, brand new. Same, everything else being equal, similar neighborhood. That's just the land and development costs are what's driving that. But here's the deal, and here's where people get fooled. They tend to apply their situation to the median. So they go, well, if the median price in my community is $400,000 and I'm moving to a community where the median price is $100,000, I'm going to get, my house is going to be 1/4 the price. So continuing with the Mississippi versus California comparison, the reason you can't do a median for median is because the median priced home in California is going to be a nicer house than the median priced home in Mississippi. The California house is going to be in a better neighborhood than the Mississippi house, simply because Mississippi is a less affluent state than California. So the typical house in Mississippi is not as nice as the typical house in California. And this is a common problem. It's not going to be 1/4 the price because the median is 1/4. The median home in California is a nicer house. And so you'd be making a downgrade. So you have to figure out, well, to get my house that I live in now in another state, what does that look like? And that's not always going to be related to the median price. When you go up in price, the cost of building the house and the structure becomes a bigger portion of the total. So the land value difference becomes relatively insignificant. That's going to be fixed. So if I'm putting a house on a 200,000 foot lot, if I put a little house on it, it's going to be a real expensive little house, right? If I put a really big house on that $200,000 lot, the price of the lot is relatively insignificant. So what I'm trying to say here is, on the California example, the $360,000 brand new house, the land was $200,000, more than half of the cost, the land and development cost, more than half. But if I put a fancy house on there that I'm going to sell for $1 million, a bigger house, 3,000 square foot, slab surfaces, Brazilian hardwoods, it's a fancier house, and I'm going to get $1 million for that house. Well, now the cost of the land and development was only a fifth of the total cost. It didn't bump it up. The land didn't get more expensive. It is what it is. This is why you see a trend in new house development here in Vancouver in particular, and in Clark County, for bigger houses. These builders want to put as much house as they can because they got so much money tied up in the land, and they're not making money on the land. They're making money on the structure. So they really want you to buy those upgrades. They want you sure you don't want the vaulted ceilings? We can do that. Because they're trying to get as much out of that $150,000 to $200,000 piece of dirt as they can. And there's this trend away from building little houses. And what our market really needs here in Clark County is little houses, so that people that are just starting out have something to buy. And that's what's driving the price of little houses up in the resale market, is the builders aren't really building them because they don't make very much money on them. Where they make their money primarily building you a nice home that you want to live in, and they make a profit on it. The land cost, they're really the only people making a profit off the land is the government, okay? Because most of those development costs are deeded back to the city in the form of the streets and the sewer and the sidewalks and whatnot. So if you move from, say, California to Mississippi, but you live in a really big fancy house, and you say, "Ooh, the median's 1/4 the median here. I'm going to get my $1.2 million house here in California is only going to be $300,000 in Mississippi." No, because you live in a beautiful home with fancy materials, and those fancy materials are just as expensive in Mississippi as they are in California. So the cost of that structure in Mississippi is only going to be about 10 or 15% less than the cost of that structure in California. The only savings you're getting is the labor difference and the land difference. So that $1.2 million house might be $800,000 or $900,000 in Mississippi, because fancy schmancy things are expensive wherever you go. So these are variables that often people get confused about when moving from one area to another, or when moving from one neighborhood to another. So if you are in a neighborhood that's a real hot neighborhood, here locally in our market, a lot of people that have school-age children are trying to move to Camas, Washington, because Camas has extra property taxes that they apply to redoing their schools and so on. And so their schools are real desirable over there. Now, I think Washington State schools in general are among the best in the country. But Camas is really sinking a bunch of extra cash into their schools, making them nicer. And so a lot of people with school-age children are like, "Ooh, I want my kids to go over there." We see a disproportionate increase in value of homes in Camas. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in Camas might be, say, $500,000, whereas that same house here in Vancouver in a similar quality neighborhood is maybe $50,000 less. So you're paying a premium because a lot of people are going over there. Okay, and that's something that is true in any real estate market, whether you're in Mississippi, Washington State, or California. The neighborhoods matter. Maybe some neighborhoods in Washington don't have a lot of jobs. Some neighborhoods in California don't have a lot of jobs. Some neighborhoods in Mississippi don't have a lot of jobs. Those neighborhoods typically have lower housing costs. So that's why the San Francisco Bay Area is super expensive. They have a big roaring economy in the San Francisco Bay Area. So everybody's going to the Bay Area because that's where the good paying jobs are. And so Central Valley area of California is noticeably cheaper than the San Francisco Bay Area. Likewise, here in our community, right here in the greater Portland metropolitan area, as you get in close to the core area where the jobs are, the housing prices tend to be a little higher. You move up north a little ways, up to Cowlitz County, just to the north of us, and there's a dramatic difference in the price of homes. 30%, 40% cheaper in some cases. Why? Because they don't have as many jobs there. And to get to the jobs from there, you have to drive an hour. And people don't want to pay top dollar if they have to get in their car and drive an hour to get to work. So those are just universal real estate rules that location does matter. The schools matter. The surrounding neighborhood matters. Sometimes you have an older neighborhood that's not as modern as a new neighborhood. Now, what do I mean by modern? Well, back in the 1950s, the development requirements for building a subdivision were not as strict as they are today. So we have a lot of neighborhoods here in Vancouver where you buy a house from the 50s, and it's a nice neighborhood, but there's no sidewalks, right? It's just a road and then your lot. So there's no sidewalks, there's no curbs, there's nothing. And so, it's a lot of people, it just doesn't look as nice, right? But that wasn't required in the 1950s. In the 1950s, the regulations and the requirements for what had to go into a subdivision were less. So if you don't mind not having a sidewalk and not having street lights or lots of street lights like a modern neighborhood does, then buying a house in an older neighborhood that's otherwise very nice with well-kept homes, you're going to save some money. So these are factors that do drive values as well in a localized market. And that's something you should think about when you're buying a house. It's not just about the zip code or the median home price. Is the neighborhood nice? Drive around the neighborhood. Are the houses nice? Are there nice people there? Are people friendly in the neighborhood? Do you feel like I could live here? Does the house do what you want it to do? So if you're not as big on having a perfectly uniform neighborhood and you're willing to live in a neighborhood that's a little more eclectic, you might be able to get a better deal and everything else is equal. Some neighborhoods have more crime. Some neighborhoods are a little more run down. So you're going to get a better price on a house in a neighborhood like that. So it behooves a home buyer to look at all of these things, not just the median price. And understand that the medians do not equate between neighborhoods equally. That's why you need a trusted professional realtor to help you in your process of buying a new home.